So now that leads us right into the equipping quadrant. And for those of you who may be familiar with it or may have forgotten a little bit about it, I'll review with you. But the first piece of the equipping quadrant is telling. And telling involves really just giving them the basic tasks that are needed for the role. And this is something that you will typically use your handbook for, but you'll fill it out with personal examples. And so as I was speaking earlier about going through your handbook and thinking through examples, that's going to cover your telling portion of the equipping quadrant. And oftentimes I find that we go straight from telling into letting people do things, and we miss these two important pieces of the quadrant. The next piece is showing. Showing is a very important piece of equipping because it enables people to really connect on a deeper level with the information that you've told them. So showing involves either doing practical exercises together or letting people watch a demonstration, you demonstrating or showing a video of some sort. But it's them taking the information and taking it to the next level by seeing a demonstration or doing an exercise that helps them process it. All right, then watching is the third piece of the quadrant, and I find that this tends to be the hardest for us in Operation Christmas Child World because for many of you, your areas are very large and you might actually not be able to go and physically watch somebody do a task that you've trained them to do. So watching involves an equippee successfully completing homework, role-playing, or being watched by the equipper. So obviously, I think watching them do it is a great way to see how successful they are or if they really understood. But in the absence of being able to physically be there the first time they do a task, you can ask them to complete homework and then review it with them. And that will let you see, okay, are they understanding? Did they get the task that I gave them to do? The other great way to watch is to do some role playing. I know sometimes that's uncomfortable for people, but it really is a great way to see if they're understanding and if they're getting the concepts that you've taught them. So we've got the telling, we've got the showing, we've got the watching, and now we're going to let them do it, and we're just going to provide feedback. And again, I think this is also a place where sometimes we drop the ball because this is ongoing. This may not even be within a month of training them. This may be 2 months down the road or 3 months down the road. So this involves having a very specific time with each team member where you're checking back with them. Okay, you've released them, you've equipped them, you've told, shown, watched, and now you're letting them go and do it. And then at that point, you need to make really sure that you're checking back in with them and then just asking, talking through it, debriefing, saying, how did it go? What successes did you have? What challenges did you have? And then you can always go back in and show or watch or tell if you feel like they've missed a piece of it. So that letting do and providing feedback is very important. And it's one of those aspects of leadership involving inspecting, where this last piece of the quadrant, the letting do and providing feedback, it's this ongoing inspection process and checking back with them. So we've developed our rack, we've developed our equipping quadrant, we know the competencies that we're teaching to, and so hopefully this gave you some good ideas on how to prepare and put together an equipping session. Now I'm going to show you in the next slides, this is a PowerPoint that you can share with your team, and I'm going to continue to talk through how I put it together, but hopefully you'll be able to see these components that we've talked about as we go through the PowerPoint. So here is the beginning of a PowerPoint that you would show your team. So we're just going to call it Engaging Prospects. And so when we're teaching on a topic, I would say we always want to start with the why. But before that, I want to share one quick thing with you about preparation. Like we've talked about before, in preparation, you're going to want to make sure people have copies of the handbook at this equipping session. You want to make sure they've got copies of the drop-off logs. Access to the internet is going to be key for your equipping session. And then it will be good, and I'll talk about this in a moment, for you to have some statistics from your area to share. That would be really helpful. And then a list of key messages, which is something that we're going to provide you with. But again, not an exhaustive list. You may have some other messages that you like to share, but these are just key messages that we tend to use a lot. So as you begin, make sure all your people have the resources that we need. And then you're going to want to start the equipping with the why. And the phrase goes, people comply when they understand why. And so here I've left this screen blank, but you'll want to add your own points on here. This is something that you'll want to personalize yourself. And I'll talk through what I would say, but you can develop your own points. So the why of engagement is really simple. I mean, clearly we want more churches, groups, pre-network partners, media outlets participating with us. But we don't only want to be able to tell this to them. We need to think of ways to help them connect it and to really understand it and to really get it in their heart. So I think a great thing to do to share that why is to share a statistical fact. So you could say, in our area, we have 566 churches that are recorded, but right now we only have 154 participating. And so we have a lot of opportunity to get people involved. And so sharing statistics can be a great way to get people to understand why this is so important. You could also share why churches aren't involved. I always talk about the example of, before I came to this ministry, I thought that Operation Christmas Child was just a Christmas gift, and it did not pique my interest at all. I didn't think it was a bad thing, but I just didn't have interest in it. And so there are a lot of people out there who are in that same boat. And for people maybe who are on your team who love this ministry, who have packed boxes forever, they wouldn't understand that, and they might not even recognize that. But it's important for them to understand that a lot of people don't know what we're about, and they think we're a Christmas gift. And so that's what we're trying to instill in them is that we need to let people know what we're about and the mission. And so as your team understands this opportunity and also understands the why, then they're going to be more engaged as you equip them. They're going to be hooked in and really excited to learn how to engage. So like I mentioned with the drop-off logs, this is a great time at this very beginning point to give them their drop-off logs, and if they didn't have them already. So they would be able to see, okay, these are the churches participating in my area, and more than likely they're going to be, appalled by the number that's on there. They're going to feel like this is not very many churches, or they're going to look at their list and see, oh my goodness, they're all Baptist. Or if you're talking to your community relations team and with groups, and they'll be like, goodness, this is only 4 or 5 groups. And so it just kind of gives them, wow, a real visual of this is it. Okay, so they're going to be excited to get some new churches and groups involved. So next, we want to share with our team the wins for engagement. I think it's always important going into an equipping that people understand what's the win? What's the win of what we're trying to do? So obviously the first win is going to be we want to increase the number of participating churches, groups, pre-network partners, media outlets. You can adjust this for whichever team you're training. So that's our number one. And then the second win is we want to add numbers that we can effectively support. And this is where you might even want to go into just a brief explanation of the high impact principle, purposeful growth, and talk about, we don't want to add on churches that we don't have anybody to support. Because as new churches come on, they're going to have questions, they're going to need resources, they might want you to come present at their church or be at their packing party. And so you don't want to bring on 15 new churches and then be like, gracious, I cannot support these people. So you really want to help your team members understand that we're going to be very intentional about who we're reaching out to, and we're going to be very deliberate about who we're reaching out to. And so one thing you might want to do with them to demonstrate this is you could talk about, okay, if you're supporting 20 churches right now, that's pretty high. 30 is about our max. And so if you want to add some new churches this year, you might want to consider adding 20% of your current list. So if they're already supporting 20 churches, well, then they would seek to add 4 new churches this year. I feel like that's a reasonable goal, but you can adjust that number for whatever you see fit for your team. But this is a great place to talk to them about, let's really look at this and let's see how many churches do we really want to add. All right. So next, we're going to get into the how-to of engagement. So just a little background on how I came up with this. I basically I wrote my own content, honestly, and then I went back and I read the handbook, and then I realized that they were very similar. And so it kind of taught me a lesson. So I would say review the handbook first and develop a list of tasks and things like that. So I kind of did that. I went through, I highlighted all the tasks, and then as I looked back at it, I read back over it and I thought, okay, how can I organize this information into, memorable pieces? We want it to be memorable, we want it to be portable. And so just like, you hear preachers doing sermons, they typically have 3 points or 4 points, and they usually have start with the same letter. So I was kind of thinking along that vein and thinking, okay, rather than just regurgitating the handbook and reading from it, how can I condense this and really make it powerful? And so as I looked through the information, I noticed that there were really just 3 things that were standing out, and they were our 3 challenges. So one is developing a good list. And so from there, I started thinking, okay, as you're developing a list, how do you want to connect with those people? What does that look like? And so I started thinking about the on-ramps. And I'll talk more about this in just a minute. But so on-ramp kind of emerged. Research emerged because as you're wanting to get a foot in the door, it's good to know your audience. You want to know who you're presenting to. And so research was already a word that had stood out to me. And then the last word was actually about tailoring your presentation so that you can appeal to your audience. And I couldn't think of a way to fit that in. On-ramp, research, and tailor, that doesn't really work. And so I just went to the thesaurus and I just looked at R words, any words that started with an R, and relate stood out to me. And I thought, well, that could work. So on-ramp, research, and then relate your presentation to the people that you're reaching out to. So that's just a little background on how I came up with this 3 R's of engagement: on-ramp, research, and relate. So now we'll talk through actually what these mean. So on-ramps, we're going to talk about this a little bit. And I'm going to talk to y'all as teachers on here about, again, some background on this. So when we're looking at teaching about on-ramps, we're always going to be thinking about, okay, how am I going to tell this to them? How am I going to show it to them? How am I going to watch them do it? And then how am I going to let them do it and provide feedback? So these are things that we're going to be thinking through. So the first thing we want to talk about is, we could develop a list from any number of places. We could just go to the Yellow Pages and start looking up churches, right? But we want to help them understand that who you ask matters. And again, we're thinking through what's the why of this principle. And so we want to help them understand that warm contacts are better than cold contacts. And then we're thinking, how can we illustrate this point? And I thought of a million different ways. I mean, you could use examples from just the secular world about, what works in sales. We all know it's all about who you know. And I was thinking about my brother-in-law. He went out on his own and he sells and buys cars for a business. And 90% of his business is from referral. He shares about his business with people that he knows. They share it with people they know, and then they share it with people they know. And so it really is all about who you know. So I think that's a kind of a good example you could use, or you could use a million other ones. So that's kind of how you could talk through who you ask matters. And then the other piece of information you want to share with them is that we want to give opportunities to experience the ministry. So rather than just picking up the phone and calling people, let's first think, are there any ways that we can give people a little taste of what we do in a non-threatening way, not in a cold calling way, but in an engaging way? And so the principle or the example I thought of for this was, when you go to the mall or the grocery store and there are people there handing out samples. They do that so that you can taste it and then you can see if you want to buy it. And again, if somebody called you on the phone and said, hey, do you want to try Mrs. Paul's fish sticks? Well, you might not want to, but if you're just out and about, or if you go to something and somebody's serving Mrs. Paul's fish sticks and you get to taste them and then you like them, well, then you're more likely to go buy them. So y'all can probably think of lots better examples than that, but that's just kind of what my mind went to was, when you're thinking about engaging, rather than just thinking who's a list of people I can call, think how can I give them little bits of engagement in the ministry, and then talk to them about here's how you can be involved with us. So we're going to talk through that a little bit more. And then finally, you always want to, if you're creating these opportunities for them to experience the ministry, you want to issue a challenge at the end of the ramp, and you want to make an ask. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about, we've talked about these principles. I've talked about them with you. And the next thing we want to do is we want to do an exercise. We want to get people engaged in this material. So a good thing that you could do for showing is going to be on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, write out your own list and be exhaustive. And then you can give your team members a list of paper or piece of paper, and they can start making a list. But you could just put up there, like for me, I would put, I've got my friends, I've got my parents and their friends, I've got my sister and her friends, I've got church friends, I've got work friends, I've got, just different groups of friends. And then I've got groups that my sister's kids are involved in, groups that my parents' friends are involved in. You can really just take it, my brother-in-law's customers or employees. And so you really just start to develop this list and show them how to do it. And when you're done, you probably have a list of 100 or more people that could be good prospects to share about the ministry. Some of them may already know. And if they already know and are participating, you can take them off the list, but there's probably a lot there that they would not know. And so that's just a good exercise to think through. Okay, here's some people I can think through. And then as you're talking through giving people opportunities to experience the ministry, you're going to want to share really good practical examples with them, because you may be in this boat too. You may not exactly know what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? Give people opportunities to experience the ministry. So I'm going to share a couple of ideas with you that you can share with your team, or you may think of some other ones. But one is, have them think through, who do you know that's hosted an event? Who are people that you've reached out to before? And so for me, I could share a story about the packing party I had in my neighborhood, and how I just simply put a flyer in the mailbox of some of my neighbors and hosted a packing party, and they came. And so they were great people to engage. And so they came, that was fun, it served a purpose, but I also challenged them at the end of the ramp. That was the on-ramp, was them getting to experience boxes. But I also had boxes there, and I said, hey, I've got 10 boxes for each of you, and y'all can go have your own packing party with your own group. And so it's multiplying, and it's getting other people involved. So that was one example. Another example is I had a team member that used to host lunch at her house once a month. And she would just pick a country like South Africa, and she would cook some food from South Africa, maybe some mashed green bananas or something, and she would invite people over, and then she would look up spiritual impact stories from that country or prayer requests. And then she would, as people were eating, they would have a fun lunch, tasting some different foods, and then she would talk about the country, and then she would talk about how they could pray, and then she would encourage them to pack a box for someone in that country and to get their church involved or get their group involved. So again, it's just giving people a little introduction to the ministry that may not know about it and that might spark an interest in them. And to me, isn't that way more fun than just cold calling people? You can have some fun hosting events and having people in your home or getting people together. And this might not work for all your team members, depending on their personality, and that's fine. But some of them might really love this approach rather than just doing cold calling. But share some examples with them like that. And then a way that you could get them more engaged in the information, again, kind of showing them how to do it, would be to ask them to start a list. And y'all can brainstorm as a team of what are some on-ramps that we could offer? What are some things that we could either do as a team, or what are some things that each team member could do individually? What do they already like to do in their life? And then work with each of them to develop a list of ideas for how they can, engage people in the ministry. Maybe it's having a crafting party and just tell people we're gonna learn how to make a necklace this week, and have some people over and start making necklaces, and then say these are for shoe boxes and get them engaged that way. So lots of different ways to do it, but you're really getting in with your team. You're not just telling them this information, but you're actually doing practical exercises with them so that they're making their own list and they're thinking it through on their own. And then I would suggest, in terms of watching, giving them homework. So an example of homework for them would be to put together an agenda for an event that they might want to have, to really think through it and develop it and see if they could come up with something that they could do to provide an on-ramp. And then you'll follow up with them in a week, and then y'all talk it through. And so that helps you see, okay, did they understand it? Are they getting it? Are they on board with this? And then the final step would be let them go do it and then provide feedback. So once you feel like they've got a good plan in place, they've identified a good idea, then you're there to support and you're there to check in with them and just kind of monitor their progress. And then certainly at the end of the event, if they host it, you check back in with them and you see what was your success, what was your challenge. So that's kind of a way that you teach this material and incorporate all 4 areas of the quadrant. You tell them, you show them, you do exercises with them, you watch them, you have them, make their own plan, and then you check back in with them. So that kind of covers on-ramps. So that's kind of our first good idea, I think, for engagement, is to give people thoughts and ideas about how they can give people a taste of the ministry rather than just doing the cold call approach. All right. Then the next topic we're going to talk about is research. And this is where you're going to want to be if you are moving on to making calls. So like I mentioned, not every team member is going to want to host events or things like that, or project leader workshops are a great example of getting people connected or engaging them through on-ramps. But not everybody's going to want to do that, and that's okay. So you may have some people that just want to start calling churches, and so that's where research really comes in. And this also would feed into if you were having events, but not quite as specifically. So if you're going to start making calls, and I would even suggest probably for most team members doing both, so they could do a call, they could start making some calls to churches at the same time that they're planning on an event, and they could kind of work it both ways. So you're going to want to start with who you know. Your first calls should be to people that you have connections with. And again, that's where developing that list of who you know comes in handy. You're really going to want to work that list. And then the next thing you're going to want to talk about is we need to know our audience. If we're going to start making calls and maybe we don't have a definite connection or a really solid connection and we don't know a lot about that person, then you're going to want to research the group that you're calling. You want to have a connecting point. And so you want to know your audience. And what you're going to want to do is use the internet. Most churches today have websites, although I know in some rural areas that might not be the case. And then you'll just have to use your personal network of who do you know that goes to that church, or who do you know that knows someone that goes to that church, kind of thing. But definitely utilize the internet and look on the website. And then you're going to want to visit the church to get a feel for their DNA if you can. If that's an opportunity for you, you might want to go. If you don't feel like you get information from the internet, or if they don't have a website, maybe just pop in for a Wednesday night service or Sunday night service. You might end up even getting to talk to somebody there, which would be great. But at least you could go and just kind of see what the church is like. And then channel your inner detective. Really think through, what do I need to know about this church before I can appeal to them? What are the types of things I need to know? So this is information you're going to want to share with your team, and now we've told it. So I've talked through these points with you, and now we're going to go back through and show. But before we do that, I wanted to say one more thing about the telling. This is a great place that we could share, again, some personal examples or some examples from life just to kind of hit this point home. So when we're talking about knowing your audience and, knowing their DNA and what we want to know about them to approach them, it's kind of like, I think about it a lot just with sales in general. I think about working with a real estate agent, and they're looking through what you like and what you don't like. And typically you show them pictures of houses you like or things like that. And so it's the same kind of thing here. We're looking at these prospects and we're trying to get an idea. What do they like? What's their particular interest in ministry? What other types of ministries are they involved in? Things like that. So that might get their juices flowing once you can give a practical example from life, like the real estate agent. This is what you're looking for. All right, so then you're going to want to show them how to do this. So you've explained why, they know that they need to do these things. So let's work on it together with showing. So I would suggest you pull up a church or group on the internet and just talk through it and say, here's what we're looking for. So we pull up this church and we're going to look in the staff section and we're going to see, okay, who do they have on staff? Do they have a missions pastor? Do they have a children's pastor? Is it just a regular pastor? You know, what kinds of things are their ministers of? That gives you a clue into what they're interested in and into who you might want to talk to. And then usually most of them will have a list of ministries that they're involved in. So you might want to look and see if they're more involved in a pregnancy resource center or a discipleship class. Maybe they're more family oriented. And so you might think about that. Well, they're more interested in family and children, or maybe they're really interested in global missions and you can really appeal to that. So you're just kind of looking and seeing, but you could show them that. You could pull it up on the internet and y'all could do it together. And then finally, you want them to watch. And so, or you want to watch them, excuse me. So this would be a place where maybe you give them homework and you say, okay, we did a church together. You know, you've got your list of churches there that y'all had worked on together. And you can say, go home and pick one of them and pull the website up and let's talk through what you find. And let's talk through what the important things are that you know about them. And then again, you let them go and do it. And then you circle back and you get feedback from them. All right, and now we're going to talk about relating. So this is where we're going to try to teach them how to tailor their approach to the church that they're reaching out to. So they've already created their list, hosted an event maybe. Now they're researching churches to call, and they've done that, and they've got kind of the information. And now, how do we teach them how to relate a message that's going to be compelling to that person? So we're going to look through this. Relate your approach to the church and the person with whom you're talking. Again, we want to explain the why. We basically want to find the key that fits. I mean, we could probably do there are a lot of different keys into this church, but there's one that's really going to fit and one that's really going to appeal to what they're interested in. And so that's why we're talking about really being intentional about your message. It's not one size fits all. I think it's important here to make sure that they know that the goal here is not to tell them everything we know about Operation Christmas Child in one fell swoop, but the goal is to give them an entrance into a meeting. The goal is at the end of the call to be able to say, hey, can I come by and meet with you for a few minutes and share a little bit more about how you can be involved? Like, that's the win. And sometimes I think a mistake is that they talk too much and they share too much about the ministry on the call, and maybe people just aren't interested. And so we're really helping them see that, we're not wanting to share everything. We're just wanting to share two main points that are really going to appeal to this person. So we're reviewing the best practice, the emailing, calling, setting a meeting. We would talk about it's really important to have an introductory email, because then you're not cold calling. Once you send the email, you're calling back, and then they have a reference point for who you are. And then you're going to choose your key messages, and then you're going to pray and make your call. So we've kind of talked through and told the information, and now we're going to want to show. How are we going to do this? So, okay, we know we want to relate our message. So again, let's take a sample church, and maybe the one that you researched, and say, okay, we've got this church. We know that they have a children's pastor. We know that they're involved with the pregnancy center. Children and family seem important to them. So let's talk through what key messages might we want to share with them. And you can show them how to do that. And you could even craft a sample, script for that and say, hey, this is what I would say if I were calling a church. And you can do role play here. You can have a couple of team members do role play. That's a great way to show and to demonstrate. And you might want to do it with a seasoned team member that y'all have worked it out beforehand, and you can demonstrate the role play. So that's a great way to show what this would look like. And then you're going to want to watch. And again, homework is a great way to watch. Maybe you give them that same church that you told them to go research, and you could say, hey, why don't you go write out, what are the key messages you would share for this church? Where would you focus in on? And let them do that. And then definitely role play with them. You know, that's a good way to watch. Role play with them and see if they're doing well with that, and provide feedback. And then finally, like with everything else we've talked about, we're going to step back, let them do it, and then we're going to provide feedback. So after they've made a couple of calls, make sure that you're touching base with them and seeing how did it go? What are the challenges? And then again, you know where to go back in and massage in further on some of these things if they're not quite getting it. All right, so that is basically it on a training for engagement. The goal would be that when your folks leave this training session, that they've got some really valid tools in their hand. They've already developed a really good list of prospects that they can start with. They know where to start. They don't have to wonder. They may be already putting an agenda together for their event if they're going to host an event. Or they have a list of churches or groups or prayer network partners that they're going to reach out to, and they're going to have some research. They're going to know to do some research, and then they're going to be equipped to make those calls. And then they're going to know how to tailor a message, and they're going to be able to deliver in a message. And so I feel like if you do these things and you really are faithful to do the tell, show, watch, and then do and provide feedback, you will have a very well-equipped team. So just to close out, just want to share resources with you. The sample script is in the handbook. And one thing we recommend is taking that script and just bullet pointing it out. It's hard to use that script when you're actually on a call. It's much easier just to have some little bullet points of things you want to share. We're providing you in this sample package a list of key messages that you could choose from. And then there's a sample intro email in the handbook. You can use that. Sample follow-up email that we were putting together. And then finally, your ministry area handbook. Those are all really great resources to share with them that will be helpful to them in their role. And then finally, just want to encourage you and encourage them with this slide. You know, as they go out and as you sort of commission them to go out and engage churches or groups or prayer network partners, this is a great scripture, just being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it out to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. That God doesn't need us. God is giving us opportunity to experience his faithfulness and his power. And so if you don't have success right at first, it's okay. You're learning. He's growing you. He's using you, and he's developing you. So just a good encouragement as you send people off. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and best wishes to you as you equip your team for engaging.